Going live. There I am. Hello, here I am. Welcome to Frankenstein Tea. This is a short story program for adult listeners brought to you from the Island Free Library here on Block Island. I am Kristen. I'm the director of that library, the Island Free Library on Block Island. And I bring you a daily short story program. I am live today here at the library. I'm on the upper level of the library, coming to you live 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, September 9th, 9/9/2020. I welcome you. Thanks for coming. We started this program as a way to stay connected to our patrons during shelter in place last year, and to continue to stay connected as this monster of a virus, hi puppy, this monster of a disease, this monster of a time, continues here in our country and around the world. And so, that's a little bit about where Frankenstein comes from, right? This reference to this monster. And, the tea is a little bit about, sitting down and trying to find our way with it. Like maybe being calm and rational. And if you can be rational during a pandemic, I'm not really sure that's what I'm being, is rational. But certainly making our way. We are making our way here at the Island Free Library. We just got some cool products in for us to get closer to opening our doors to the public. It's not happening yet. I don't even want to speak those words. I don't want to get anybody excited, but you should know that we're working towards that happening, right? That's always our goal. That's been our goal. That's why we behave the way we do, so that we can stay safe, stay healthy, and get people inside this building. So we're getting there, and we got some products in today to do that. I don't think I have. I should bring one. Maybe I'll bring one tomorrow to Frankenstein Tea so you could see it. We'll see. Let's see what happens. But I read a story every day. It's always for an adult listener. They are adult topics, adult themes, adult language. They are for adults. So, if you have kids in your room or grandkids in the room right now, cut me off, come back to me later. These stories are on the YouTube channel always. We don't take them down. They're all up there. So if you enjoyed today's story, listen to another or re-listen. Oh, which reminds me, Dad. Yeah, so my dad is a good listener, and he's on there now. And I read a hard story last week. I don't know if I have that book near me. Yeah, it was probably this Octavia's Brood, right? It was probably from here. And it was that my father wrote to me that he listened to it 3 times and he still wasn't sure he understood it. And you know what, Dad? That was a hard story. That was hard. I read it 3 times. The 3rd time I got it a little bit more, but of course I'm also reading it. So I think I'm making different connections that are harder for you to make because I'm actually seeing the words and the names. She was like writing as herself to her future self. No, she was writing as herself. What was she doing? To her past self as her future self or something. It was hard. That was a hard story. But there was some good stuff in that story. So my dad listened 3 times. Maybe I should read that one again. I'm not going to read it today, but maybe we'll read that one again together. If not, go back and listen to that. That's Octavia's Brood, something from Octavia's Brood. It's this book. I think it was the Adrienne Marie Brown. I think she wrote that. Evidence. Oh no, it wasn't her. She's the editor. It's Alexis Pauline Gumbs. Evidence. Tough story. Sci-fi, future selves, past selves, strange language, futuristic language, tough story. All right. Today's not an easy story either. I don't usually preface a story with any sort of description, but I will say I'm going to start reading and leave it at that. I'm going to have a sip of water. I have water today. But when I was getting my water, I was thinking about how great that tea was yesterday. Tea was really good yesterday. I didn't do it today, although it's kind of a tea day. There's a little bit of gray in the sky. It hasn't rained here yet. I guess maybe rain is coming tomorrow. Not sure. But on we go. All right. So I'm reading today from the Black American short stories, A Century of the Best. It was edited by John Henrik Clark. Black American short stories, Hill and Wang, a division of Farrar, Straus, and Giroux out of New York. First published in 1993. Maybe 1966. This is the one that the copyright is weird for me. I think maybe the editor, I'm not sure. Maybe he wrote a new preface or something. These are old stories, though. Oh, I think I can look at that, right? Does it tell me when these stories? What does it say? Yeah, so the one I'm reading today is called A Summer Tragedy by Arna Bontemps. It was copyright 1933. 1933. That's 90 years old, I think, something like that. 87 years old. And it's reprinted by permission of the author. Certainly, I don't have that permission today, but please know that I read respectfully from this book as a library program here. So again, I'm reading A Summer Tragedy by Arna Bontemps. Old Jeff Patton, the black sheriff farmer, fumbled with his bow tie. His fingers trembled, and the high, stiff collar pinched his throat. A fellow loses his hand for such vanities after 30 or 40 years of simple life. Once a year, or maybe twice if there's a wedding among his kinfolk, he may spruce up. But generally, fancy clothes do nothing but adorn the wall of the big room and feed the moths. That had been Jeff Patton's experience. He had not worn his stiff bosomed shirt more than a dozen times in all his married life. His swallow-tailed coat lay on the bed beside him, freshly brushed and pressed, but it was as full of holes as the overalls in which he worked on weekdays. The moths had used it badly. Jeff twisted his mouth into a hideous, toothless grimace as he contended with the obstinate bow. He stamped his good foot and decided to give up the struggle. "Jenny," he called. "What's that, Jeff?" His wife's shrunken voice came out of the adjoining room like an echo. It was hardly bigger than a whisper. "I reckon you'll have to help me with this here bow tie, baby," he said meekly. "Dog if I can hitch it up." Her answer was not strong enough to reach him, but presently the old woman came to the door, feeling her way with a stick. She had a wasted, dead leaf appearance. Her body, as scrawny and gnarled as a string bean, seemed less than nothing in the ocean of frayed and faded petticoats that surrounded her. These hung an inch or two above the tops of her heavy, unlaced shoes and showed little grotesque piles where the stockings had fallen down from her negligible legs. "You oughta could do a heap more with a thing like that than being as you good sight." "Looks like I oughta could," he admitted, "but my fingers is done Democrat on me. I get all mixed up in the looking glass and I can't tell which way to twist the devilish thing." Jenny sat on the side of the bed and old Jeff Patton got down on one knee while she tied the bow knot. It was a slow and painful ordeal for each of them in this position. Jeff's bones cracked, his knee ached, and it was only after a half dozen attempts that Jenny worked a semblance of a bow into the tie. "I got to dress myself now," the old woman whispered. This is ma old shoes and stockings. and I ain't so much as unwrapped my dress. Well, don't worry about me no more, baby, Jeff said. That bout finishes me. All I gotta do now is slip on that old coat, and yes, I'll be fixed to leave. Jenny disappeared again through the dim passage into the shed room. Being blind was no handicap to her in that black hole. Jeff heard the cane placed against the wall beside the door and knew that his wife was on easy ground. He put on his coat, took a battered top hat from the bedpost, and hobbled to the front door. He was ready to travel. As soon as Jenny could get on her Sunday shoes and her old black silk dress, they would start. Outside the tiny log house, the day was warm and mellow with sunshine. A host of wasps were humming with busy excitement in the trunk of a dead sycamore. Gray squirrels were searching through the grass for hickory nuts, and blue jays were in the trees, hopping from branch to branch. Pine woods stretched away to the left like a black sea. Among them were scattered scores of log houses like Jeff's, houses of black share farmers. Cows and pigs wandered freely among the trees. There was no danger of loss. Each farmer knew his own stock and knew his neighbors as well as he knew his neighbors' children. Down the slope to the right were the cultivated acres on which the colored folks worked. They extended to the river more than 2 miles away, and they were today green with the unmade cotton crop. A tiny thread of a road, which passed directly in front of Jeff's place, ran through these green fields like a pencil mark. Jeff, standing outside the door with his absurd hat in his left hand, surveyed the scene tenderly. He had been 45 years on these acres. He loved them with the unexplained affection that others have for the countries to which they belong. The sun was hot on his head, his collar still pinched his throat, and the Sunday clothes were intolerably hot. Jeff transferred the hat to his right hand and began fanning with it. Suddenly, the whisper that was Jenny's voice came out of the shed room. "You can bring the car around front whilst you waitin'," it said feebly. There was a tired pause. Then it added, "I'll soon be fixed to go." "All right, baby," Jeff answered. "I'll get it in a minute." But he didn't move. A thought struck him that made his mouth fall open. The mention of the car brought to his mind with new intensity the trip he and Jenny were about to take. Fear came into his eyes. Excitement took his breath. Lord Jesus. "Jeff, oh, Jeff," the old woman's whisper called. He awakened with a jolt. "Huh, baby? What you doing?" "Nothing, just studying. I just been turning things round and round in my mind." "You could be getting the car," she said. "Oh, yes, right away, baby." He started round to the shed, limping heavily on his bad leg. There were 3 frizzly chickens in the yard. All his other chickens had been killed or stolen recently, but the frizzly chickens had been saved somehow. That was fortunate indeed, for these curious creatures had a way of devouring poison from the yard, and in that way protecting against conjure and black luck and spells. But even the frizzly chickens seemed now to be in a stupor. Jeff thought they had some ailment. He expected all 3 of them to die shortly. The shed in which the old T model Ford stood was only a grass roof held up by 4 corner poles. It had been built by tremulous hands at a time when the little rattletrap car had been regarded as a peculiar treasure. And miraculously, despite wind and downpour, it still stood. Jeff adjusted the crank and put his weight upon it. The engine came to life with a sputter and bang that rattled the old car from radiator to taillight. Jeff hopped into the seat and put his foot on the accelerator. The sputtering and banging increased. The rattling became more violent. That was good. It was good banging, good sputtering and rattling, and it meant that the H car was still in running condition. She could be depended on for this trip. Again, Jeff's thought halted as if paralyzed. The suggestion of the trip fell into the machinery of his mind like a wrench. He felt dazed and weak. He swung the car out into the yard, made a half turn, and drove around to the front door. When he took his hands off the wheel, he noticed that he was trembling violently. He cut off the motor and climbed to the ground to wait for Jenny. A few minutes later, she was at the window, her voice rattling against the pane like a broken shutter. "I'm ready, Jeff." He did not answer, but limped into the house and took her by the arm. He led her slowly through the big room, down the step, and across the yard. "You reckon I ought to lock the door?" he asked softly. They stopped, and Jenny weighed the question. Finally, she shook her head. "Never mind the door," she said. "I don't see no cause to lock up things." "You're right," Jeff agreed. "No cause to lock up." Jeff opened the door and helped his wife into the car. A quick shudder passed over him. "Jesus!" Again he trembled. "How come you shaking so?" Jenny whispered. "I don't know," he said. "You must be scared, Jeff." "No, baby, I ain't scared." He slammed the door after her and went around to crank up again. The motor started easily. Jeff wished that it had not been so responsive. He would have liked a few more minutes in which to turn things around in his head. As it was, with Jenny chiding him about being afraid, he had to keep going. He swung the car into the little pencil mark road and started off toward the river, driving very slowly, very cautiously. Chugging across the green countryside, the small battered Ford seemed tiny indeed. Jeff felt a familiar excitement, a thrill as they came down the first slope to the immense levels on which the cotton was growing. He could not help reflecting that the crops were good. He knew what that meant too. He had made 45 of them with his own hands. It was true that he had worn out nearly a dozen mules, but that was the fault of Old Man Stevenson, the owner of the land. Major Stevenson had the odd notion that one mule was all a share farmer needed to work a 30-acre plot. It was an expensive notion, the way it killed mules from overwork, but the old man held to it. Jeff thought it killed a good many share farmers as well as mules, but he had no sympathy for them. He had always been strong, and he had been taught to have no patience with weakness in men. Women or children might be tolerated if they were puny, but a weak man was a curse. Of course, his own children. Jeff's thought halted there. He and Jenny never mentioned their dead children anymore, and naturally, he did not wish to dwell upon them in his mind. Before he knew it, some remark would slip out of his mouth, and that would make Jenny feel blue. Perhaps she would cry. A woman like Jenny could not easily throw off the grief that comes from losing 5 grown children within 2 years. Even Jeff was still staggered by the blow. His memory had not been much good recently. He frequently talked to himself, and although he had kept it a secret, he knew that his courage had left him. He was terrified by the least unfamiliar sound at night. He was reluctant to venture far from home in the daytime. And that habit of trembling when he felt fearful was now far beyond his control. Sometimes he became afraid and trembled without knowing what had frightened him. The feeling would just come over him like a chill. The car rattled slowly over the dusty road. Jenny sat erect and silent with a little absurd hat pinned to her hair. Her useless eyes seemed very large, very white in their deep sockets. Suddenly, Jeff heard her voice, and he inclined his head to catch the words. Is we past Delia Moore's house yet? She asked. Not yet, he said. You must be driving mighty slow, Jeff. We just as well take our time, baby. There was a pause. A little puff of steam was coming out of the radiator of the car. Heat wavered above the hood. Delia Moore's house was nearly half a mile away. After a moment, Jenny spoke again. You ain't really scared, is you, Jeff? Nah, baby, I ain't scared. You know how we agreed. We gotta keep on going. Jewels of perspiration appeared on Jeff's forehead. His eyes rounded, blinked, became fixed on the road. I don't know, he said with a shiver. I reckon it's the only thing to do. A flock of guinea fowls pecking in the road were scattered by the passing car. Some of them took to their wings. Others hid under bushes. A blue jay, swaying on a leafy twig, was annoying a roadside squirrel. Jeff held an even speed till he came near Delia's place. Then he slowed down noticeably. Delia's house was really no house at all, but an abandoned store building converted into a dwelling. It sat near a crossroads beneath a single black cedar tree. There, Delia, a caddish old creature of Jenny's age, lived alone. She had been there more years than anybody could remember, and long ago won the disfavor of such women as Jenny. For in her young days, Delia had been gayer, yellower, and saucier than seemed proper in those parts. Her ways with menfolks had been dark and suspicious, and the fact that she had had as many husbands as children did not help her reputation. Yonder's old Delia, Jeff said as they passed. What's she doing? Just sitting in the door, he said. She see us? Jeff said. Musta did. That relieved Jenny. It strengthened her to know that her old enemy had seen her pass in her best clothes. That would give the old she-devil something to chew her gums and fret about, Jenny thought. Wouldn't she have a fit if she couldn't find out? Old evil Delia. This would be just the thing for her. It would pay her back for being so evil. It would also pay her, Jenny thought, for the way she used to grin at Jeff long ago when her teeth were good. The road became smooth and red, and Jeff could tell by the smell of the air that they were nearing the river. He could see the rise where the road turned and ran along parallel to the stream. The car chugged on monotonously. After a long silent spell, Jenny leaned against Jeff and spoke. How many bale of cotton you think we got standing? She said. Jeff wrinkled his forehead as he calculated. About 25, I reckon. How many you make last year? 28, he said. How come you asked that? I was just thinking, Jenny said quietly. Don't make a speck of difference, though, Jeff reflected. If we get much or if we get little, we still going to be in debt to old man Stevenson when he gets through counting up again. It took us a long time to learn that. Jenny was not listening to these words. She had fallen into a trance-like meditation. Her lips twitched. She chewed her gums and rubbed her gnarled hands nervously. Suddenly, she leaned forward, buried her face in the nervous hands, and burst into tears. She cried aloud in a dry, cracked voice that suggested the rattle of fodder on dead stalks. She cried aloud like a child, for she had never learned to suppress a genuine sob. Her slight old frame shook heavily and seemed hardly able to sustain such violent grief. What's the matter, baby? Jeff asked awkwardly. Why you crying like that, like all that? I's just thinking, she said. So you the one that's scared now, huh? I ain't scared, Jeff. I's just thinking about leaving everything like this. Even we've been used to it. It's right sad like. Jeff did not answer, and presently Jenny buried her face again and cried. The sun was almost overhead. It beat down furiously on the dusty wagon path road, on the parched roadside grass, and the tiny battered car. Jeff's hands, gripping the wheel, became wet with perspiration. His forehead sparkled. Jeff's lips parted. His mouth shaped a hideous grimace. His face suggested the face of a man being burned. But the torture passed, and his expression softened again. You mustn't cry, baby, he said to his wife. We gotta be strong. We can't break down. Jenny waited a few seconds, then said, You reckon we ought to do it, Jeff? You reckon we ought to go ahead and do it? Really? Jeff's voice choked. His eyes blurred. He was terrified to hear Jenny say the thing that had been in his mind all morning. She had egged him on when he had wanted more than anything in the world to wait, to reconsider, to think things over a little longer. Now she was getting cold feet. Actually, there was no need of thinking the question through again. It would only end in making the same painful decision once more. Jeff knew that. There was no need of fooling around longer. We just as well do like we planned, he said. They ain't nothing else for us now. It's the best thing. Jeff thought of the handicaps, the near impossibility of making another crop with his leg bothering him more and more each week. Then there was always the chance that he would have another stroke, like the one that had made him lame. Another one might kill him. The least it could do would be to leave him helpless. Jeff gasped. Lord Jesus. He could not bear to think of being helpless, like a baby, on Jenny's hands. Frail, blind Jenny. The little pounding of the motor car worked harder and harder. The puff of steam from the cracked radiator became larger. Jeff realized that they were climbing a little rise. A moment later, the road turned abruptly, and he looked down upon the face of the river. Jeff? Huh? Is that the water I hear? That's it. Well, which way you gonna go now? Down this-a-way, he said. The road runs alongside of old water a little piece. She waited a while calmly. Then she said, Drive faster. All right, baby, Jeff said. The water roared in the bed of the river. It was 50 or 60 feet below the level of the road. Between the road and the water, there was a long, smooth slope, sharply inclined. The slope was dry, the clay hardened by prolonged summer heat. The water below, roaring in a narrow channel, was noisy and wild. Jeff? Huh? How far are you going? Just a little piece down the road. You ain't scared, is you, Jeff? Nah, baby, he said, trembling. I ain't scared. Remember how we planned it, Jeff? We got to do it like we said. Brave like. Jeff's brain darkened. Things suddenly seemed unreal, like figures in a dream. Thoughts swam in his mind foolishly, hysterically, like little blind fish in a pool within a dense cave. They rushed again. Jeff soon became dizzy. He shuddered violently and turned to his wife. Jenny, I can't do it. I can't. His voice broke pitifully. She did not appear to be listening. All the grief had gone from her face. She sat erect, her unseeing eyes wide open, strained and frightful. Her glossy black chin had become dull. She seemed as thin, as sharp, and bony as a starved bird. Now, having suffered and endured the sadness of tearing herself away from beloved things, she showed no anguish. She was absorbed with her own thoughts, and she did not even hear Jeff's voice shouting in her ear. Jeff said nothing more. For an instant, there was light in his cavernous brain. The great chamber was, for less than a second, peopled by characters he knew and loved. They were simple, healthy creatures, and they behaved in a manner that he could understand. They had quality. But since he had already taken leave of them long ago, the remembrance did not break his heart again. Young Jeff Patton was among them, the Jeff Patton of 50 years ago who went down to New Orleans with a crowd of country boys to the Mardi Gras doings. The gay young crowd boys with candy-striped shirts and rouged brown girls in noisy silks was like a picture in his head. Yet it did not make him sad. On that very trip, Slim Burns had killed Joe Beasley. The crowd had been broken up. Since then, Jeff Patton's world had been the Greenbrier Plantation. If there had been other Mardi Gras carnivals, he had not heard of them. Since then, there had been no time. The years had fallen on him like waves. Now he was old, worn out. Another paralytic stroke, like the one he had already suffered, would put him on his back for keeps. In that condition, with a frail blind woman to look after him, he would be worse off than if he were dead. Suddenly, Jeff's hands became steady. He actually felt brave. He slowed down the motor of the car and carefully pulled off the road. Below, the water of the stream boomed, a soft thunder in the deep channel. Jeff ran the car onto the clay slope, pointed it directly toward the stream, and put his foot heavily on the accelerator. The little car leaped furiously down the steep incline toward the water. The movement was nearly as swift and direct as a fall. The two old black folks, sitting quietly side by side, showed no excitement. In another instant, the car hit the water and dropped immediately out of sight. A little later, it lodged in the mud of a shallow place. One wheel of the crushed and upturned little Ford became visible above the rushing water. Arna Bontemps wrote today's selection, titled A Summer Tragedy. All right. That one might be worth a second listen. Struck me differently the second time I read it here now. So if you're so inclined, please do. If not, that's it for today, and I'll see you tomorrow for another episode. Thanks so much for coming. Take good care of yourselves. Mask up, wash your hands, keep your social distance, physical distance, whichever language you prefer. 6 feet. 6 feet apart. That's what I'm trying to say. All right. Have a good afternoon. Take good care of yourselves, and I'll see you tomorrow. Peace.